Welcome to Common Sense Rhode Island. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and we have with us today Don Allen, who is a... Good morning. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Don is a small businessman, and he is the parent of 4 children in the Burrowville Public Schools. And he has done a lot of investigation in the Common Core standards and the PARCC test that the standards are built on, or the test is built on the standards.
That's correct, yeah.
Some real negative things came out this summer. Students finally took the PARCC test, and it was a real disappointment for us as a state, and for certain communities it was devastating to find out how poorly students did on this test. I'd like just to spend a little bit of time on this. I know you've really looked at the test and the standards, but you know, as a state, about 36% of our students are proficient, which means that 64% are not. That we can't fail that many kids. We can't fail to give them the education they need to have good, productive adult lives. If you look at certain communities, it gets even worse. Central Falls, 5% of the kids are proficient. Pawtucket, 14%. Providence, 10%. These are really bad numbers. I know you got involved in this because you care about kids getting good education. What's your impression of these test scores?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me on today.
Okay.
And Happy New Year.
I haven't finished grilling you yet, so maybe.
No, that's right. Well, we'll see how we end up
at the end of it. That's right.
That's okay. I look forward to it. My impression with the scores, first let me just say there was some expectation of lower scores based on what PARCC had said to expect. So if we just go on their word saying, look, this is a new test based on new standards, you have take time to work out the kinks. So if you give them the benefit of the doubt that, okay, this is a new test, we have some learning curves and some kinks to work out, if you will, we were expecting lower scores based on their own admission.
Were we expecting that 90% of the kids in Providence would not be proficient in reading or math?
Well, certainly, I wouldn't expect so.
No.
What I do have in terms of feelings about the test and the standards that they're built on, I think helps to explain some of what we see in some of the results. Because, as you'll find, we had an initiative in Burrowville. We had a huge opt-out percentage. We call it refusals, what we call it, because that's what we're doing, is essentially refusing the test. But that element of pushback trickled down through some of the other students who I don't believe took the test as seriously as they might have otherwise. So
yeah, and I know that you don't like the test, but for me, when we were in the General Assembly, I think it's 2 years ago, we had the kneecap, right, which was being used, I think, in a lot of schools as a diagnostic test. They could figure out, all right, students aren't learning decimals well, or this particular student can't get this particular concept, and they could go back and reteach.
Yes.
And so having that diagnostic test used as a test that was a graduation requirement, I thought, okay, there's a mismatch there. But at that time, we were assured as policymakers that the PARCC would fill that test, would fill that void, that there needs to be some kind of standardized test that tells us whether students are learning or not, right? I mean, we can't keep just passing kids through the educational system and having them get out after 12 years of sitting there without the skills they need to be employed and to have good lives.
Right. So no, I don't disagree with that premise. The challenge for me in agreeing with you is to overcome my issue with the standards themselves, which this test is supposed to
Be built on.
So it's very difficult for me to get on the same page on the concept of an assessment until we address the underlying issue.
Okay.
So once we have crossed that threshold and that hurdle, then I would agree with you 100% that accountability is necessary throughout the system. Whether or not that is implemented from the federal government or whether we have our own statewide sort of assessment remains to be perhaps worked out. But
Now, if you look at just the PARCC scores across the state, there are some communities where clearly the educational level of the parents, the income level is higher, and they did better than kids in Central Falls, Providence, where probably lower income, right? They probably are poor kids.
socioeconomics means a lot.
So would you have different tests? Because every kid needs to get out there in the world and compete with one another, whether they came from a poor family or a rich family. They all have to get out there and compete for the same jobs. We don't have jobs for kids that came from poor families or ones that came from rich families, right?
Right. Everybody, there's a mandate, public schools must educate everyone, so the goal is, and the job is to figure out how best to do that, right? When you look at socioeconomic issues, clearly there are influences in lower socioeconomic situations that differ from families in wealthy communities. You can't get around that, and so those influences.
So is that a testing issue or a teaching issue?
Well, certainly if you had a quality teacher to overcome those issues, you can certainly rely on that teacher to do those things, and that's really what you want, right? I mean, you want a teacher that can address the needs of their students and educate them according to their needs, as opposed to some mandate of certain things that have to be taught in a certain way, because every child learns in a different way. So the teacher's the one that can facilitate those adjustments and make a classroom a better place. So that's what I encourage, and I know trying to assess that on a test score is difficult to hold a teacher accountable for all of those things, but at the same time, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? I mean, good teaching comes from good teachers, Yeah. And that's really what we want,
from teachers
right?
knowing their craft
Right.
and the skills that they need. So when we look at the Common Core standards, you think that they've been developed without inappropriate to the ages of the kids, or inappropriate to the kinds of things they want them to learn, or both? Or
It's a combination of a few things. What we see with the earlier grades is that they are taught to do simple math in a number of different ways, rather than instructing them and forcing them to learn and memorize certain concepts.
Sure.
And then the older grades...
1 + 1, 2 + 2,
Right,
sure.
right. And the older grades, they sort of lower the bar for the minimum standards and don't really have a provision to test for higher skills and higher math. So there's a combination of a few things that seem to not fit in appropriately with what education should be. So...
Boy, it looks like, to me, like you've read the entire standards and really, really thought about them. For you to be able to say from the first grade and the second grade to higher level that you see differences there. So, we're going to take a break right now.
Okay.
And do a Are You Kidding Me? But when we come back, I'd like to have what you see in the Common Core standards that concerns you.
Great.
Great.